Welcome to the annual African-American Genealogy Day event, hosted by the Georgia Archives and the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, Metro Atlanta chapter. I'm Penny Cliff, Education Specialist here at the Georgia Archives. We're glad that you've joined us. I'm going to introduce both speakers before the first presentation. Our first speaker is Deputy Director of the Georgia Archives, Kayla Barrett. In her presentation, Kayla will provide an overview of Georgia Archives collections documenting Reconstruction and Civil Rights in Georgia, and how this information can be utilized in genealogical research. Our second speaker is President of AAHGS Metro Atlanta chapter, Tammy Ozier. Tammy will provide a brief overview of the history of the Freedmen's Bureau and share where the records can be found online. She will demonstrate how to find these records on Ancestry, Family Search, and the Smithsonian websites, and provide examples of the rich genealogical information contained in these records, plus tips and resources on how to get started. Welcome, our first speaker, Kayla Barrett.
Can you see this? Okay. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for our program. In reviewing the Georgia Archives records on Reconstruction and Civil Rights, there is so much going on politically and socially that it was necessary to limit the time period covered in this presentation. So I will be discussing records from 1865 to 1870. Georgia's readmittance to the Union for a second time, and Democrats taking control of both the General Assembly and the Governor's Office in 1870 seemed like a logical ending point for the presentation. In addition to looking at records created during this time period, which are valuable for genealogists, I will be reviewing laws and political events. I will be quoting a lot of dates, because I think it's important in reviewing records, to be aware of the events that produce them. Now, these slides have a lot of information, but don't worry, the presentation slides will be available on the programs page of our website, so feel free to review them at your leisure. I'll also be using the terms free persons of color, and Negroes, because these are the terms used in the legislation and they are legal terms during this time period. Now, this presentation, it does run a little bit long, so if you would please hold your questions to the end of the presentation, that would be a great help. So thank you. I think at the end of the Civil War, beginning in Reconstruction, that there were very different expectations of the white population versus the black population in what emancipation would mean. I think it's fair to say that the white population expected that the status of blacks would be very similar to what it was before emancipation for free persons of color, where they really had very few rights. They could not be parties in court. They couldn't own real property. They had to have a legal white guardian registered for them to help them conduct their business. And I think that was the assumption of white people, because that's what they were familiar with. Blacks had far different expectations for what freedom meant. Above all, it meant freedom of movement, that they were no longer confined to the farm or wherever the property of their former master. They could move around from place to place. They could choose their employers. They could choose not to work for certain people. They could change employers if they could find better terms and better employment. And so that, at the very most basic level, those two expectations are very far apart. So there was guaranteed to be problems in working out relationships and the legal procedures that for both blacks and whites in Reconstruction. President Johnson, who succeeded President Lincoln in 1865, took control of, he had his own framework for Reconstruction for readmitting the former Confederate states to the Union. And his requirements for readmission to the Union were really pretty simple. Each former Confederate state needed to adopt a new state constitution, since most of those had been adopted for the Confederacy. They needed to ratify the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution abolishing slavery, and they needed to repudiate the state's Confederate debt. He was pretty generous in pardoning ex-Confederate leaders, and was really, his aim was to finish Reconstruction as quickly as possible. So with these guidelines in mind, Georgia held a constitutional convention in October and November of 1865, and the Constitution that they wrote was adopted by that convention. And in the meantime, in November 5th, there was an election for a new governor and U.S. congressmen and state legislators. And with that election having taken place, the newly elected General Assembly began its session on December 4th. Now, I think at this point it'd be useful to review the Reconstruction amendments to the U.S. Constitution, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, because all of these played a vital part in readmitting Southern states to the Union, and they each had their own issues. The 13th Amendment was pretty simple. It abolished slavery, and it was passed by Congress in January of '65, before the war ended, and was ratified by Georgia on December 6th of '65, right after the General Assembly went into session. The 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship for all natural-born, native-born, and naturalized persons in the United States, and gave them due process and equal protection under the law. It also disqualified from office any official who broke their oath to support the U.S. Constitution and by engaging in insurrection or rebellion or gave aid to the enemy. This law was passed by Congress in June of '66 and ratified by Georgia 2 years later, after rejecting it in November of 1866. The 15th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote. The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That was passed by Congress in February of 1869 and ratified by Georgia a year later. And you'll see the progression of these amendments in granting an increasing number of rights to citizens and to the newly emancipated Black population. The 1865 Georgia Constitution, which was passed, the Constitutional Convention itself repealed the Ordinance of Secession and repudiated the state's Confederate debt, which were two prerequisites for readmission. The Constitution, which was passed, was actually very similar to the 1865 Constitution. It abolished slavery. In terms of difference, it abolished slavery and prohibited interracial marriage. It also directed the legislature to pass laws for the government of free persons of color. The legislature was to do this. It was not in the Constitution. And it also directed the legislature to create a county court. And we will see how that affected the Reconstruction period. It also defined electors, voters, as free white males over 21. Now, the legislative session in 1865, there were serious concerns among state leaders and also members of the Freedmen's Bureau about what was going on in Georgia. The harvest of 1865 had failed, and there was very much concern about hunger and starvation for both Black and white populations. So it was very critical to get a crop in the ground, to get that planted and to get it harvested. And to do that, Georgia needed a reliable labor force. So those were two of the concerns underlying the laws that were passed. This is, the page that you're seeing here is from the code for the state of Georgia that was published in 1867 under the 1865 Constitution. And you'll see under the laws for persons of color that really there are not that many specifically for them, but it refers to their rights after slavery, and we'll go over these here. The Major Act, which was passed on March 17th of 1865, an act to define for persons of color and to declare the rights of such persons. The law defined persons of color as those with 1/8 African blood. And it also gave persons of color the right to make and enforce contracts, to sue and to be sued, to be parties and give evidence in courts, to inherit, to purchase, lease, sell, hold, convey real and personal property, and to benefit from all laws and proceedings for the security of their persons and their estates. And also they were not to be subjected to any other or different punishment for any offense than those prescribed for white persons committing the same acts or offenses. Now, these rights were very important because African Americans under slavery did not have these rights. They could not make contracts, they couldn't sue or be sued, they had no standing in court, they could not inherit, and they could not own property. Any actions that they took had to be undertaken by a white guardian, which had to be registered within the county. So these were rights that the white population had that are now being extended to African Americans. Other laws, apart from that one, that were passed in both the 65 and 66 legislatures, which are important for genealogists, especially this first one. This law passed on March 9th, which stated that those living together as husband and wife as of March 9th, the date of the passage of the act, were declared married. Specifically, they sustained that legal relationship of husband and wife to each other. And this is really important in genealogy because we get a lot of requests to find marriage records from this time period. And because of this law, there may not be a marriage record. And if one can't be found, it's useful even before asking to look at the 1870 and the 1880 census and find the couple. And if they have children who were born before 1865, there's a very good probability that this was a slave marriage and it was recognized by this law. So there won't be a marriage record. Also, the law passed which for persons of color are required to maintain their children, and importantly, children born as of March 9, 1866, that date, were declared the legitimate child of the mother and of the father if the father acknowledges the child. And this law is important for legitimating children of color because bastards could not inherit under Georgia law at this time. Also, children of color have the same legal obligations to their parents as white persons. And the law was clarified a year later to state that the mother controls the children if the parents separate. And this is a difference from the law that was understood that whites have been following for years, because if the parents separated or divorced, the father retained control of the children. Only if the father abandoned the family and the wife sued for divorce on grounds of abandonment did the mother have control of the children. So this gives the mother legal rights to control the children. Also, colored ministers were given the right to marry freedmen and freedwomen, but you will notice they do not have the right to marry white persons. If you look at the index for the Journal of the House of Representatives for 1865, there were a number of bills that were introduced to the legislature which did not pass and which were much more confining and narrow than would narrow and restrict some of the rights of the black population than what actually passed. again, and this is true in any legislature session of the legislature where bills are introduced and they never make it into law. And some of the bills were actually covered by other laws. There's a little bit of duplication of legislation in the bills that are introduced. Now, some of the examples that I found were interesting was a law to prohibit white persons from purchasing certain articles from Negroes. And this passes back to laws for free persons of color and for slaves, where they were prohibited from buying and selling. Actually, they had to have the right granted within the law to buy and sell certain products in certain areas. Also, a law to compel railroad companies to furnish separate cars for persons of color. And in looking at the press and in the journal, this was a pretty contentious topic throughout the South. And there are articles and letters of opinion from both other Southern states and Northern states regarding this topic. This particular bill did not pass. Another interesting law proposed from the standpoint of genealogists was to establish the given names and surnames of colored freedmen. And that's really intriguing to genealogists. Had that law passed, which it didn't, it would be a little bit easier one would suppose, to do genealogy if the names had been legally established. However, I tend to think that the jurisdiction for this, to carry this out, would have gone to the county courts, the county officials, and they were already overburdened with backlog of cases and work. And without additional support for this, it probably might not have been that successful. Also, a law to prevent vagrancy, and this was another hot topic throughout the South, as former Confederate states passed very stringent vagrancy laws. And these came into criticism in the Northern press, and so this particular law did not pass. And there is actually a strategy behind the laws that were passed during this session. State leaders, political leaders, wanted to get the federal government out of the state as quickly as possible. And the reasoning was that if we pass laws that don't specify race and don't draw attention to them, that will make that goal easier to achieve. Other laws affecting persons of color which don't state anything about race include an revision to the apprentice law, and the creation of the county court, as they were directed by the Constitution, to deal with minor criminal offenses and civil cases under $100. And these cases had formerly been handled by the inferior and ordinary courts, but now they're given the jurisdiction to the county courts. The purpose is a little bit revealed by the giving jurisdiction to the county court for all cases arising out of the relations of master and servant, because it was supposed that most freedmen and freedwomen would be servants. In addition to that, a law was passed that written agreements for a term of service of not more than a year, and those are labor contracts, were to be filed in the county court and known as court contracts. And it stated that the agreement had the effect of a judgment and decree, and that any issues with either party, those would be tried by jury. And the third act, which affected freedmen, was the Tax Act for 1866, which taxed all males over 21. And this is the first tax that didn't specify taxing all white males over 21. We'll talk a little bit about each of these as we go along here. Here are some examples of Chatham County, of court minutes from Chatham County, from the county court. I chose these because they're in pretty good shape. They're easy to understand. The handwriting is clear, and there is the Chatham County Superior Court minutes do have a lot of information in them. These are 3 cases for misdemeanors that were tried in the county court, and you can see who was charged and what the charges were. And in each of these cases, the defendant pled guilty and threw themselves on the mercy of the court. And the sentence was a fine and costs, and if they could not pay that, which most could not, They were to work in the City of Savannah Public Works or serve time in the county jail for a limited amount of time, which would be the equivalent of paying out that fine. The next page also has another case, but there's also 4 cases dealing with lawsuits for small amounts. And in each of these cases, there's not much information, but the judgment is for the plaintiff. And you will see that in county court minutes, a number of lawsuits over debt trying to collect small amounts. These had all been transferred from the inferior court. There was a backlog of these cases from 64 and 65, where pretty much county government broke down. And you can also find, interestingly, cases where the estate is suing, where they're trying to collect on debts owed to the estate simply so the estate can be settled. So the effect of the county court is that it supplies another court and another judge to try to clear the backlog of cases from the inferior court. Now, some counties where you will find these, the sentences that were passed for these crimes were much more severe, especially initially. And as the law clarified the rights of freedmen, those lessened in severity by 67 and 68. The next law for apprentices. Now, Georgia had used apprentices back to colonial times, and it was a system that had been developed in Europe where tradesmen taught a young person their trade in exchange for food, clothing, and shelter. And there was usually a legal contract or an indenture between the master and the apprentice. And sometimes the apprentice's parents signed, especially if they bound out their children to learn the trade. Now, the Georgia county courts had used apprentices to provide care for orphans with no means of support back to the beginning of the county courts. And this was their way, because the orphans with no means of support became wards of the county, and it was necessary to provide food and shelter for them and some kind of schooling and training. Because remember, there is no foster care system in the state of Georgia until the early 20th century. The apprentice law, as it was changed, said that all minors would be bound out as apprentices to whichever parent had legal control of the minor. They could buy them out. Minor children whose parents were too old or infirm or poor to support them, or the parents resided out of the county, which the children were basically abandoned, or orphans whose parents' estates, there was not enough there to support the children until they turned 21. The county judge, in effect, became their guardian, and the judge could bind them out as apprentices. The terms of the contract are fairly standard now, as the law states here. The master is to teach husbandry or farming or house service or some other useful trade or occupation, and habits of industry, honesty, and morality. And the clue in the wording that this was to take care of children of color is that they were to learn farming, farm labor, or house service. The master was to furnish them with food, clothing, and medical attention, to see that they're taught to read English, and to govern them with humanity as a father would discipline his own child. The judge could dissolve the relationship based on certain conditions. Now, the terms of these contracts are fairly standard in any of the minutes. In Terrell County, and these records are found in the Court of Ordinary, the apprenticeships that began to be recorded in 1866, and this is actually by the county court, not the ordinary. But many counties just did not start new books when this court came into effect. They incorporated those minutes into the ordinary minutes, and sometimes also into the superior court minutes. But here you find the children who are being bound out, and their names and ages, to Mary L. Waller, and they're to be taught to labor and live with and continue to serve during their minority until they turn 21. They are to obey their commands, deport and behave as faithful laborers, and interestingly, never revealing her secrets or neglecting her business. And in turn, she was to instruct them as laborers and see that they're taught English, and to provide them with meat, drink, and clothing. And at the end of the apprenticeship, she was to allow them $100 and 2 suits of clothes. That's at the discretion of the ordinary, depending on performance of the apprentice and the means of the master or mistress. And this settlement was fairly standard for apprenticeships in Georgia and throughout the United Southern states. This is the introduction to that indenture, where you find the genealogical information, the names and the ages of the children and what their status was. They're orphans, so there are no parents or other relatives listed here, and who they're bound out to, and the terms until they reach their majority. Where can you find apprenticeship and county records? These can be difficult to locate. They don't survive for all counties, and they're not available for all counties. But to start with, check the county microfilm card catalog in the virtual vault for apprenticeships from 1866 and for county court minutes from 1866 to 68. If you don't find anything explicit there, check the ordinary minutes beginning in 1866 to see if the county court minutes or those cases are included there. And also Superior Court, sometimes you find them there. Family Search has the records that are available online. Search the catalog for Georgia and the county name, and choose the support records from the list of subjects for the appropriate type of record. Apprentice contracts in the ordinary minutes, they are seldom indexed. So often the question is, well, what became of the apprentices? Check the next census to see with whom the child is living. And in those that I've looked at, maybe in one case, they're still living with the family by the 1870 or the 1880 census, depending on the time frame. You can find them. When you find them, they are living apart from the person who apprenticed them. Often I've seen them with other young people of the same age, and they're not living anywhere close to their former master or mistress. So and without finding any judgment by the court where the apprenticeship was canceled, the conclusion, a guess, is that some of these apprenticeships that were formed right after the Civil War, they just kind of petered out. The arrangement did not work as the children became old enough to basically care for themselves. Other arrangements were made. County Property Tax Digests. Now, these are very important records for African-American genealogists, and I've talked about these before extensively. But remember, pre-1865, there was a poll tax for white males and a separate higher tax rate for free male persons of color, which is why this 66 Tax Act is a major departure from tax policy. It required a tax of $1 upon each and every male inhabitant of the state on a certain date between the ages of 21 and 60. And that's the poll tax or the head tax. Now, this law goes back actually to the 1780s, where a poll tax was charged for white male taxpayers. So the tax itself is nothing new. It's just for the first time applied to African-American males. If the tax was not paid, if there was a default and the person owned a property and was employed as a laborer, the employer was garnished for the tax, and that explains how the information is recorded in the tax digest. Freedmen and colored are listed in tax digest separately from white taxpayers from 1867 well into the 20th century. Freedmen's employers are listed beginning in 1867. It took a while to work this out. And in some counties, the employers are listed until the 1890s, although many of the populous counties dropped that fairly early. Here is a Lawrence County Tax Digest from 1860, and you see that these are white taxpayers that are being listed. If you look at the top of the page, you can see that there is a column for polls of whites, a column for polls of colored persons, and those are numbered, but the freedmen themselves are not listed by name. And then over here at the end under number 3, there is a column for the number of hands employed by you between 12 and 65 years of age. And in all of the cases that you see here, the number of hands employed is larger than the number of polls paid, which means that the employer is employing women, he's employing young men under 21, and in some cases over 60 for farm labor. The Campbell County Tax Digest from 1867, here you can see there are columns for the name of the employer and the name of the freedman, and it lists the employer and then the freedman who they employ, because they realized they really needed to account for that tax being paid. So this is the arrangement for a number of years afterwards. Here is a Richmond County Tax Digest from 1867, and again, Augusta is in Richmond County. And you see the employers are listed in alphabetical order. This is a page from the H's, and you can see who they are employing. And then down there at the bottom, there is a space, and then you find a number of freedmen whose last names begin with H. And there's no employer listed, but they're also paying tax on property, in some cases fairly significant amounts. These are self-employed freedmen. Now, counties had different ways of recording self-employed freedmen because the tax digest really wasn't set up for that. Often they're listed at the bottom of the page after the white employers with a bit of separation there. And then in other cases, they're interspersed with the white employers, and it's kind of hard to tell whether these people are self-employed or not. That's confusing. And I've seen one or two cases where we've got to record the employers, so the freedman who has acquired enough property that he can hire farmhands, he's listed as the employer together with the freedman that he's employing, and also to indicate that he is a person of color, he's also listed in the freedman column, so he's kind of double listed. So counties have different ways of recording this, and in later years, as African Americans gather more property, they buy livestock and farm tools, which allows them to work as tenant farmers, or they buy land and can share crop. You'll see more and more of income distribution, taxes paid by free persons of color for other types. Where can you find tax digests? It's important to know that our holdings for pre-1872, those are incomplete. We don't have every tax digest for every county. In 1872, the law was changed to require the counties to submit a copy of the tax digest to the state. So the number increases remarkably in 1872, and by 1874, we pretty much have a complete collection of tax digests until the end of the 20th century, probably between 90 and 95%. You can find in Ancestry.com, and the name of the collection is here, Property Tax Digests. These are scans of the digests, the originals that are in our holdings. This collection includes tax digests from 1874 to 1890 for most counties. We cut it off at 1890 because that is a substitute that we had for the 1890 census, which burned. This collection is searchable by name and date in the county, and you can find all kinds of information here, especially with it being searchable. If I can't find people in 1870 or 1890 census, and the 1870 census is a little hinky, I can usually find them in the tax digest and where they're living at a given point in time. And the tax digests also show movement from year to year as people find different employers and a better situation, and also the accumulation of property. And FamilySearch.org also has tax records with the county records, the records for that county under the subject heading taxation. And these are scans of the microfilm copies of the original tax digests that are actually held by the county governments, that we don't have them. Most of them are pre-1874. Now, this collection isn't searchable by name. It's the same access as you would have if you looked at the microfilm. But to cover all your bases, you really do need to look at both collections for the tax digest. And for some counties, we have pretty complete sets with a few gaps, but you can check every 3 or 4 years. If you find property in the tax digest, the next question is, well, when did they get it? How much was it? Who did they buy it from and how much did it cost? And you find more, then you have to look at the deed books, and you'll find more of these into the 1870s, but here is an indenture or a deed in 1867 from Thomas Brady to Robert Lumpkin, who is noted as a person of color in Macon County. And Thomas Brady sold a couple of town lots in Oglethorpe to him for $50. And so this transaction is recorded in the Macon County deed books, which I found on Ancestry, on Family Search. Outside of Georgia, other events are going on with the federal government. The radical Republicans did not like how President Johnson handled Reconstruction. They thought he was far too lenient, that he pardoned too many ex-Confederates. And then when he vetoed several acts that were extremely important to them, including a Civil Rights Act and an act extending the Bureau of the Freedmen's Bureau for another couple of years, they became very upset and they overrode his vetoes. The election in 1866 produced a solid Republican majority in Congress, and they took over the process of Reconstruction. It's known as Congressional Reconstruction from 1867 to 1872. They determined that President Johnson did not have the authority to frame the terms of Reconstruction. That was a congressional prerogative. So they very quickly in the new session of Congress in 67 passed 4 acts known as the Reconstruction Acts. And this completely was a game changer for Reconstruction in Georgia and in other southern states. The first one, the former Confederate states were divided into 5 military districts, with Georgia in the 3rd district under General Pope. So from that day, Georgia is under military rule, and there is no session of the General Assembly in 1867. The second Reconstruction Act provided for an election for all males, excluding former Confederate leaders, to participate in constitutional conventions to form new state governments with a new constitution that would replace the ones that they wrote in 65. The voters had to swear oaths of allegiance to the United States. And this registration process and the election was firmly in control of federal authorities in Georgia. General Pope directed the registration of Georgia's eligible black and white voters, men, to vote for delegates to the Constitutional Convention, and that election was in October, November of 67. The third Reconstruction Act stated that the new state constitutions had to require provide for universal mandate suffrage. And finally, the fourth act, the states had to ratify the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Amendment, in order to be readmitted to the Union. The records that were produced for the voter registration for the Constitutional Convention are an important genealogical record in African American research, because it's the first record to record freedmen over 21 with last names throughout the state of Georgia, regardless of burned counties or not being recorded in court records, or the records missing for some other reason and we just not having them. Over 93,000 black male voters were registered, so throughout the state. So this is an important record. And I'm pointing here to the Coweta County Returns of Qualified Voters, which was one of the 2 records produced, just a list of the voters and the information about them. And focusing on Sanford Page here, and at the top you can see what information was collected about him, with his registration date for voting and his name and where his oath of allegiance is recorded, and his race, and this length of residence, which the minimum was 12 months in the state and the county and the precinct. The precinct and county were only 6 months, but there were residency requirements to be eligible to vote, just as there is now. The oath books are the other record. There are 2 oaths per page, where the oath to be sworn is actually printed out and the person taking the oath signs. Here is Sanford Pope's oath. You see his name is spelled two different ways, his first name, but this is the oath that he swore to and where he signed by his mark. Where can you find these records? They're in Ancestry, in the returns of qualified voters and Reconstruction registration oath books. The date, these are actually from 67, they don't go to 69. The collection is searchable by name and county. I want to talk a little bit about prisoners' records because the penal code changed prior to 1865. Slave trials and trials for free persons of color were tried by a different court. The laws were different, the punishment was different. But after emancipation, the black population is incorporated into, those laws now apply to, the penal code applies to them as well. Now, the laws dealing with specific crimes in the Georgia Code, they usually state the minimum and the maximum sentence and whether the time is to be served in the state penitentiary, and that's known as the legal code. The penal code dating back to 1817 when the penitentiary was opened, many sentences, they'll specify hard labor or solitary confinement depending on the crime. Now, most sentences with less than 12 months' time were served in the county jail. It was not worthwhile to transport prisoners to the state penitentiary for sentences less than 12 months. Because the county court in 1866 dealt with lesser offenses that draw sentences of less than a year, most of those convicted served the time in the county, and the serious felonies then were tried in the Superior Court. And all of this comes into chain gangs or hard labor. These were employed both by the penitentiary and the county jails to work on public works, road maintenance, public buildings, and railroad maintenance. And this is a distinction that I want to stress because we get many requests for records on chain gangs from the penitentiary and even for specific individuals. But chain gangs were employed both by the state and the county government. And so people who were serving short sentences, if they're on the chain gang, they're going to be with the county jail and not in the penitentiary records. There is a common belief in the 19th century shared by many that prisoners should not be idle. If you break the law, your punishment should include hard labor. And this is where working on public works come from. Taxpayers did not like to pay taxes for prisoners to sit around while they serve their sentences. They need to work. And this dates back prior even to the Penal Code of 1817. The state penitentiary itself, again, it opened in 1817, but it burned in November of 64. The prisoners are registered or documented in the Central Register of Convicts, which is really the major record that we have for the penitentiary system. We don't have case files. There are very few registrations in the Central Register from 65 to May of 67 because the penitentiary, they were having trouble appropriating funds to reconstruct it. So many prisoners remained in the county jails. Provisional Military Governor Thomas Ruger, he began leasing the prisoners in May of 1868 to try to relieve the pressure on the county jails and to come up with some semi-workable form for housing prisoners. The convicts were divided into three sections, assigned to three major groups of lessees. And when you look in the Central Register throughout the period until the chain gangs were ended, you'll find prisoners assigned to the companies that leased them, including Penitentiary Number 1, Penitentiary Number 2, and Penitentiary Number 3, and those are the dates of who the prisoners and the companies that lease them, and you'll find both terms used, Dade Coal Mines or Penitentiary Number 1. Those penitentiaries, they're not physical buildings, it's just the name for the entire penitentiary system. But also remember that other companies and individuals lease convicts. The Central Register of Convicts, there were a number of volumes kept for different purposes, but at this time period, There was a chronological register when prisoners came into the system and which gave information about them and when their sentence expired and their final disposition in the prison system. And there's also an alphabetical register for the use of prison officials to quickly locate those records. You can tell actually from the chronological register when African Americans entered the penal system. In this particular page, they went back and noted colored prisoners based on the complexion of what they knew about the prisoners. And you can see exactly where this begins on line 2029, admitted June 12 of 1867. Where can you find these central registers? They were important in genealogical research. There's a lot of interest there. They're available in Ancestry, and they're searchable by the name, by the date received, by the county of residence, and also the date and county of conviction. If you know them in any events field, you can search that too. So it's a powerful research tool. And it's important because many families know of relatives who ran afoul of the law in one way or another and who are in the penal system, and they can find out here what happened to them. And also sometimes these records come up in searches in Ancestry, and people realize that this family member, they didn't know what happened to them. They just kind of dropped out of the records. But this is where they are. This is what happened. They're in the central register. A detail from the central register where we can see details about John Troutman, his age, description of his height, and hair and eye color. He is a hand or a farmhand. He's born in Georgia. The only crime listed here is misdemeanor. We don't have any more details of that. And then on the next page, you can see the dates received and when his sentence expired. This is actually June 12 of 1867, and then his date, he was released on June 12 of 69 at the expiration of his sentence. And we can actually find details about his crime, or his case, I should say, in the county records. You can, for many cases, not all. In this particular case, Bibbs County Superior Court has good records and with quite a bit of detail. In his case, this misdemeanor crime only has the sentencing, where he is remanded on February 7th of 1866 to Macon City Jail until he could transfer to the state penitentiary, be transferred there, and then he was to be confined to hard labor for 2 years. Now, we saw on the previous page where he didn't actually arrive in at the penitentiary until June of 67, so he's remaining in the city jail for this amount of time, and you can see how these cases have been backlogged. And then he served the entirety of his sentence in the penitentiary. He did not get time for the time that he served in Macon County Jail. There are a lot of things going on during this time period while these records are being created. Again, the election for delegates to the Constitutional Convention, and in this convention, there were 37 Black delegates elected, and this is significant because it's the first statewide election where Blacks are elected. The Constitutional Convention met in Atlanta from December of March of 68, and during this time period, General Ruger was appointed the provisional governor. The election that was held to ratify the state constitution that had been created by the convention in April, and they also elected the state officers and state representatives and U.S. congressmen in this election. It resulted in 29 Black representatives to the House of Representatives being elected, and with this, the Republicans fell 3 short of a majority in the House. In the Senate, 3 senators were elected, and the Republicans controlled the Senate. Rufus Bullock was elected governor. The new General Assembly began meeting on July 4th, and by the end of the month, both houses are investigating the qualifications of members the ex-Confederate leaders by order of General Meade, but also of the African-American legislators. The state constitution of 68 was very different from the constitution of 65. It fulfilled the requirements of the federal Reconstruction Acts. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and resident in Georgia were declared citizens of Georgia. The Constitution provided for universal manhood suffrage. The General Assembly was instructed to provide a free school system. Also provided for debt relief. Also, the first law that passed that all property of the wife was to remain her separate property and not liable to her husband's death. And this is very important because prior to this, a wife's property came under her husband's control unless she had trustees appointed. So from this date for 1868, then you can find Black women buying property, being suing in court, and find them also in the tax digests. The Constitution abolished the county courts. The radical Republicans hated those courts and got rid of them in the 68 Constitution. And the Constitution also moved the state capital from Milledgeville to Atlanta. The story of the Black legislators in 68 through 70 really deserves, there was so much going on, it really can't be dealt with in a session of this length. There are bills introduced, there are reports submitted, there are minority reports, there are substitution reports, and going through the journals, it's hard to keep track of what's going on and finally what the final result was and what caused that result. But basically, the House and Senate Committees on Privileges and Elections investigated the qualifications of all the members, and including the Black legislators. They were challenged initially on legal qualifications for holding office, such as residency in the House, but that quickly devolved into challenges based on race. Throughout the investigations, and this was debated extensively back and forth in the House, they voted that 25 of the 29 Black House members were not qualified to hold office, and that passed on September 3rd. And two others, they hadn't finished their investigations with the other four, and two others were later disqualified. In the Senate, Senator Aaron Bradley's eligibility was initially questioned based on his having served time in New York, but there is so much of a racial overtone to this. He sent his resignation to Governor Bullock in August of 68 after it was evident that he was going to be expelled. And then the Senate debated the qualifications of the other two members, and they were ruled ineligible and expelled on September 12th. The journals are a bit opaque with what is going on, but these debates were, the General Assembly was covered in the Atlanta Constitution, and very heavily there were reporters in both, a reporter in the House and a reporter in the Senate, who reported everything, all the bills that were being introduced and excerpts from debates. They transcribed it. There's no transcript surviving created by the General Assembly. Here is an extract from the day after the House members were expelled, which notes here at the end, it's pretty dramatic, but a motion was then made to adjourn the House session when Henry McNeil Turner, said that he would like to walk out before the House adjourned. He was going to walk out on his own power instead of being thrown out. The request was granted, and he approached the speaker's desk and raised his foot and brushed the dust from his boots and then retired. And the reporter sounds a little bit surprised that everything went off peaceably and quietly. The newspapers are very important for conveying the sense of white opinion during this time period. And also for legislative information, because the newspapers in the state capitol, whether it was Milledgeville or Atlanta, reported daily on the General Assembly when it is in session, and it's a valuable comparison for what you find in the House and Senate journals. The newspapers also have letters to the editor, which are basically opinions, and they republish articles from other newspapers, both in Georgia and out of state. So you can get a fair sense of the white public opinion through the newspapers. Other than the Atlanta Constitution, there are newspapers online available in Georgia historic newspapers, but you need to be aware that the holdings for 65 to 67, they're scattered. Most of those newspapers suspended publication, and not a lot of surviving issues remain. But the Atlanta Constitution began its publication about 3 weeks before the General Assembly held its first session in Atlanta, and I don't think that's any coincidence. And they covered, again, the General Assembly, and these include extracts of the speeches, which may or may not be accurate, depending on the shorthand, and the debate by the members. In the meantime, with congressional reconstruction, the whole issue of freedmen being qualified to hold office, that was settled by the Supreme Court case in June of '69, where the Georgia Supreme Court ruled that African Americans have a right to hold office in Georgia because they're citizens under both U.S. and Georgia law, and in absence of any specific law barring them from holding office. And those bills were introduced, but they did not pass. So the Supreme Court decision settled that question of just about the technical right to hold office. In January of 1870, General Alfred Terry was fed up with the going-ons in the General Assemblies, and he removed the ex-Confederates from the General Assembly and replaced them with Republican candidates for their districts, and he reinstated the expelled black legislators, and they served out their term in 1870. The following month, that Republican legislature in the General Assembly ratified the 15th Amendment and chose new U.S. senators, so that by July, Georgia is again readmitted to the Union. And with that status confirmed, then the election in December of 1878, there was, for the General Assembly, which was to convene the following year, the Democrats won commanding majorities in both houses. And then in December, they began investigating Governor Bullock, and he fled the state to escape impeachment for misappropriation of funds, among other things, in October. And so a special election was held in December where ex-Confederate Colonel Jameson Smith was elected to complete Bullock's term. So by 1871, you have, or actually 1872, the Democrats are firmly in control of the General Assembly and the executive office. In addition to the resources that I've shown you for the genealogical record, there are published resources that are available online, such as Georgia legislative documents, and this is a wonderful resource because the laws, they are transcription of the laws, and they're searchable in so many different ways, by keyword, by date, if you have a citation to the session laws, the year and page where it was published. Georgia historical newspapers, I've mentioned, the codes of the state of Georgia for 67, then also in 1873, with laws passed under the 68 Constitution. Those are available online through the University of Georgia Law Library has all of the historic Georgia codes, and they're really easy to use. The proceedings of the journals for both constitutional conventions are available online, and the House and Senate journals for these time periods, Emory has made their collection available online. Now, the journals are not complete for this time period, but we have them from both the House and the Senate for 65, 66, and 68. And that is all I have. Do we have any questions?
We do. We have some questions right here. I have a question for you. It was a common practice to deem children orphans if the parents were leased or sold. Have you come across any instance where the children were redeemed by a relative once they went into apprenticeship or indenture? Now, another attendee answered and said she had, but the question is whether you've run across that.
I have not. As I said, I haven't found any And I haven't looked extensively at the court minutes, and I've not been looking for any individual, which gives you a target for what to look for. But as I said, I don't find any cases arising to cancel those apprenticeships or to where one of the parties disagrees and the county judge has to step in. So I have not. If others have, that's wonderful, and we'd like to hear more details about how you found that. And again, the county minutes are in different shapes, the county court minutes in different shapes from county to county. And go ahead.
Okay. Are there records where the leased convicts were sent to brickworks and or farms throughout Georgia?
We do not have records of those leases. Those have not survived, but where you find that they are sent is in the central register. There is a note in the remarks about where they were assigned.
Okay, in 1865, what products couldn't be bought from freedmen? Do you have any examples?
Not off the top of my head. I would say that most of those products, in anything that was going to conflict or impact with profits from white merchants or farmers, were going to be barred. So most of those are crafts that slaves engaged in. But the details, and I can't recall off the top of my head, but they are in the Georgia Code. And if you search Georgia legislative documents with questions about slaves, and I can't think of any other keywords off the top of my head, but there are examples of those in the General Assembly, and also the laws for slaves within metropolitan areas, specifically Augusta and Savannah, had legislation passed which gave slaves much more latitude, and free persons of color, for what they could do, because they were such an integral part of the economy in those cities.
That is all of the questions we have right now.
Okay. Thank you, and time quit. Let's take a break, and then we'll be ready for Tammy's presentation at 11:15.
Hi, can you hear me okay? How's the sound? There was an echo. I hope it's okay. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Just say yay or nay. Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes. Exciting, exciting, exciting. I see some of my relatives. Hello. Some of my childhood friends. Hello. Some of my grown-up friends. Hello. So we'll get started shortly. Thank you. Cynthia and Deborah, I see your hands are up. Did you have a question for the previous speaker? Cynthia? Well, maybe you can put it in the chat. I think we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation. So it is 11:15 and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I would like to first, pardon me, first thank the Georgia Archives for again partnering with the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society Metro Atlanta chapter. This has been a great partnership that we've had over the last few years, and we hope that this partnership can continue. So if you guys can hear me okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tammy Ozier, and today I will be discussing how to research the Freedmen's Bureau records online. Now, can you guys all have, I hope you guys can all hear me. We're going to go ahead, and again, I'll answer questions at the end of this presentation, if you don't mind. The objectives of this meeting today, we're going to talk about an approach in finding Freedmen's Bureau records. I'm going to introduce you to the Freedmen's Bureau record set, and we're going to learn how to find the records. And we will also look at sample records from this data set. Then we're going to conclude with a summary. Now, before we get started, or before you get started in your Freedmen's Bureau research, the thing that I would tell you, if you're doing this for genealogy, make sure you understand your family's history. Make sure you understand what information you have, at least as of 1870. I like to say use the 1870 census as a baseline. The 1870 census is important, especially when researching the formerly enslaved families. It is because that is the first census that the formerly enslaved would have been enumerated by name. Know their names, know the nicknames, know the neighbors, who were their associates. What vital information do you have of them? Do you know their approximate birth dates? Were they married? Did they have siblings? All of that information will be very important to you to match the Bureau records to your family. Now, an approach to finding your people in the Freedmen's Bureau I've outlined here. First, you have to know the Bureau's history. You have to understand the hierarchy. You have to understand what kind of records you can find in the Bureau. You need to be able to identify the location, and you need to read the descriptive pamphlets for the location. We're going to talk about descriptive pamphlets later, but let me just say that it is your guide to understanding the Bureau for your research location. Now, next you will just kind of determine, what kind of records do I think I will find, or what kind of records I think I will seek in the Bureau. Then you're going to search index records, and then you're going to browse non-index records. Now, what is the Freedmen's Bureau, or the Bureau as we like to call it? Now, the formal name of the Bureau is the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. Now, the freedmen are the formerly enslaved persons. You know, refugees are the whites that would have also needed relief services. And the abandoned land, refers to land owned by Confederates that were abandoned and came under the management of the Bureau. Now, this was established by the War Department, and the official dates of the Bureau were 1865 to 1872. However, there are pre-Bureau records as early as 1863. And there are actually some records that that you can find that's after 1872. The group of these records is called NIRA, the National Archives Record Group 105. And one note, the Freedmen's Bureau is not the Freedman's Bank. Where did the Bureau operate? Well, the Bureau operated, as it states here, in the former Confederate states, the border states, and the District of Columbia. All of the area that's color-coded here is where the Bureau operated. The Bureau's national headquarters, as it states here, was in D.C., and it was headed by the Bureau Commissioner, who was Major General Oliver Otis Howard. A lot of names and a lot to say there. Now, this is the hierarchy of the Bureau. Now, at each level of the Bureau, you're going to find records. You may find letters sent, letters received, rations record, reports. So every level within the Bureau generated records. As I stated previously, the commissioner had the headquarters in DC. Now, the headquarters would provide national oversight. They produced the circulars, the regulations. Next, you would have the assistant commissioners. They were the state heads, right? They provided state oversight. They distributed circulars. They pushed up and down the chain of command. Now, this next level, superintendents would be for the education, and sub-assistant commissioners were in some locations or some states. They operated out of subordinate field offices, and they provided oversight for a district. Now, a district could be comprised of either one or more county or parish. And then we come to the agents and the staff officers. They ran out of field offices. And this is really where people got to touch, if you will, the Bureau. They provided the local representation. They were in the cities and towns. They were handing out rations. They were handing out clothes. So this is where most of the records actually can be can be seen. I want to stop now. Are we having problems seeing my presentation? Okay, all right, so I can keep going. I just want to make sure everyone can see what I'm showing. Okay, can you guys see it? Okay, what I'm going to do, let me just stop this for a second. I'm going to stop presenting, and then I'm going to, I know some people still say they couldn't see it, so I'm just going to reshare. So let me just try that. I just want to make sure all you guys get the same information. So just hold on here. And of course, it's not coming up. Oh, gosh. Okay, there we go. So let me try this again. I'm going to try to get us back to where we were. So just give me a moment. Again, I just want to make sure everyone can see and there's no issue. And it's not letting me move. But thank you for letting me know you can see. So just give it a second because it's not moving and I was on a roll. Oh, okay, I need to stop again. Always these technical issues. Okay, I think I'm back. Let me know if I'm back. If you guys can see okay. Whew. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay, where were we? We were talking about the agents, I believe. And so just understand that most of the records are going to be at this level where the field offices are. Okay? So, what kind of information can you find in the bureau? So, I've listed some items here, and it's not everything, but you can find registers, for example. The registers may have the names of people, they may have their ages, may have where they're from. It may list their former slave holder, that type of information. You may have rations. There are rations lists. There are ration applications that you may find. There's military records also in the Bureau, labor contracts. Maybe there's information about schools, marriages, a lot of different information you can find in the Bureau. So what you're trying to do is look through these records and try to mine your genealogy information. So one of the things here, and what this list, I'm trying to close the chat. Make this bigger, excuse me. So what we have here, this is a list of the microfilm publication numbers of the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, each of the M-numbered item represents a series. So you see this M742 as an example is a series. In each series, there contains reels of microfilm. Now, knowing the series and the associated microfilm reel can help you pinpoint where to look for your records, right? What location you're looking for, you need to understand the series and the associated microfilm reels. Now, each series has a descriptive pamphlet. Now, that descriptive pamphlet will be your guide to help you understand what information is on that reel, all of the information, right? And one of the things you can also find, some of the series are actually numbered in logical order. For example, you'll have field offices most of the field office series start with M19. Now, what is a descriptive pamphlet? As I mentioned before, they are the guides. They are guides for each of the microfilmed Bureau series. The descriptive pamphlets provide an overview of the Bureau. What is the history of the Bureau? But it also, I'm sorry, you guys asking me to do, how do you get rid of the teens toolbar? Okay, that information I won't be able to answer. I'm sorry. Okay, what is the descriptive pamphlet? Let me just continue, and I'm going to try to ignore what's in the chat for now, so I can continue. What is in the descriptive pamphlets? Now, the pamphlets, as I state, it gives you the overview. What is the state specific information and history? It tells you how many reels, what are on the reels, what was the operation, because the Bureau operated or may have operated differently from state to state. So your descriptive pamphlet is the key to understanding how the Bureau operated in the location that you are researching. So you must read the descriptive pamphlets to understand how to effectively navigate the Bureau records. Okay, now we're going to get to how to access these records. Okay, so this is a list of the key links of getting to the Freedmen's Bureau records online. We're going to talk about National Archives Records Administration, which is NIRA, the Smithsonian Online Virtual Archives, which I call SOVA. We're going to talk about FamilySearch.org. We're going to talk about Ancestry.com. And we're also going to talk about Mapping the Bureau. Now, this is just a short chart to kind of tell you what you can find at each of these sites. All of them will give you access and give you information on the Bureau, the history and overview of the Bureau. You also, at each of these sites, will be able to have access to the descriptive pamphlets. Maps, really mapping the Freedmen's Bureau is where you would find the maps associated with the Freedmen's Bureau. And then you start getting into the various levels of the headquarters, of the records. So headquarters, state, field offices. At some sites, the information is not indexed. Some sites it's partially indexed, and other sites those records may be indexed. So I've indicated on this chart, the type of information that you can find. Now, one of the things that I would like to just say here is that there may be a question as to why do we need all this? Why do we have all these links to get to the Freedmen's Bureau? Now, I can't answer that specific question, but I'm grateful that they are at all of these different locations so that I can browse, so I can play, so I can see which site feels better for me to actually do my research. Now, the thing I would say about index versus non-index, yes, of course, we all want indexed information, but sometimes the index is not correct. Maybe a name is spelled differently than the way that you know the name to be spelled. Maybe you don't have a name. Maybe you only have a location. And in that case, you have to be able to browse the records so you can find that one record that can help you break your case, break into your genealogy wall, if you will. So that's the case for looking at non-index records. So Freedmen's Bureau, I think, is an excellent way to get started looking at the Freedmen's Bureau, right? So let's go to that site. You go to the site, here's the link, At the site, you go to the menu, select Maps at the top of the menu, and then at the bottom, you click on View Map. And here you see a sea of all these red flags or tabs. Those are the locations of the field offices, of the hospitals, of other key information or location related to the Freedmen's Bureau. And what you're going to do now, you need to get to your location, you need to try to find your location on the map. In this example, I am trying to get to Savannah. Now, the thing is, also note all of the neighboring field offices or locations, because your family may not have gone to the field office that may have been closest to their location. Maybe they could get better service or quicker service at a field office that maybe was another hour away. So always make sure that you note what are the offices that were close by, the nearby locations, even if it's in a different state. So I'm going to select Savannah, and when you select a tab, you'll be taken to you'll get this pull up, and it'll give you information about that location. It'll give you a link to the descriptive pamphlets. It'll tell you the number of reels and which reels relates to that particular location. And if you have a slider here, you'll be able to get additional information. It may have additional information about that location. Like it may be an article that was written about how the Bureau operated specifically at that location. Or maybe there's a book or some other reference. So make sure when you're looking at your site, once you find a location, that you're also using the slider to look at all of the information that's available. So that's the Freedmen's Bureau, mapping the Freedmen's Bureau. Now let's talk about NAIRA, National Archives. Now, National Archives, they own the data. They microfilm the records. And they have a site for Freedmen's Bureau. And that Freedmen's Bureau site has information about the history, provides you an overview, and it has a lot of references. It gives you references, links. It gives you information to, you can see images of the records. This brochure is excellent, a nice compressed way to understand all of the information that's there. And then as you continue to scroll this particular sheet or page, you'll get to the records. So in this example, you can see headquarter records. You'll see the state records for the assistant commissioners. You'll see the entire, the field office records. So now you can actually see the different information, or the records, if you will. So if I'm looking at headquarter records, I can then see the list of series under that level. Then, if you select the PDF icon next to that series, you'll be taken to the descriptive pamphlet. To the far right, if you select images, you'll be taken to the images for that record on Family Search. And if you select information, you'll be taken to the Family Search Wiki. Okay? So if you were to, let's say, if you wanted to see the field office records, you would do pretty much the same as we did with the commissioner information. In this case, you would go to Georgia. If I'm using Georgia as the example, you would expand Georgia, you would see the series, and then you can look at the PDF icon to get the descriptive pamphlet, and then here, images if you want to actually look at the records, and then information if you want to look at the the wiki on family search, and this would be images or the records that would be on family search. So let's go to family search. So family search has this wiki as I just described when we were talking about NIRA, and they have a lot of information, and they have a lot of references to information about the Bureau. Again, articles, links to other sites that we're not even talking about in this discussion. There will be information on books. I mean, just a lot of information. So you can really study this wiki and get additional information about the Bureau here. And as you continue to scroll on this page, you would get to a section called Accessing the Records. That's where you find the records on family search. And it's divided into two sections. It's divided into those records that are indexed. And you see that section here, it says index and image collections. And those where you would have to browse, and it's called image browse collections. So those are the two sections or how you get to the records on family search. So let's do an example of looking at an index record on family search. So I'm going to select in the index records labor contracts. I'll be taken to this page. Excuse me. And just like any index here, you can enter a name, you can enter the first name, last name, both names. You can enter a place. Now play around with the parameters. You know, this is an index, you're never sure, you don't know exactly how that information may have been indexed. So you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to use different parameters to make sure that you're able to get to the information that you need. Now, in this case, I'm going to use the example of Calvin Blackshire, and I'm going to put in the place as Savannah. But maybe I don't want to put Savannah. Maybe I want to put just Georgia, just to see how many Calvin Blackshires was in Georgia. Maybe I don't want to put anything to see all of the Calvin Blackshires that's in the index records. So again, play with the parameters and just be flexible when using the index. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the information as I have it here, and I'll be taken to this search yielded 2 records. I'm going to select the first record, and I'm going to go to View Record on the right. I'm going to select that button, and then I'll be taken, or I'll see an image, and then for me to see the image more closely, I select the Original Document button. Then I will be taken to this item. It takes me to the image 194, and you see it's 194 of 1,193. And here I am at the record. You can use the controls to get to zoom in and out. It's a labor contract for a Calvin Blackshire. He is the freedman, and he is contracting with Lucinda Parker and Jonathan Parker, who are the employers. Now, let's see how we would do, or what we need to do to get to that same record, but by browsing. So I'm going to go to the Browse Collection. Not moving. There you go. Then I'm going to go to Georgia, and it takes me to this page. You see there are over 108,000 images on this of images in this particular part of the collection. So you hit Browse All, and you will see this page. This is a page of all of the field offices, because that's what I selected, the field offices in Georgia. Now it's giving me a choice of the field offices that are available. I'm going to select the Savannah Sub-Assistant Commissioner office. I am now going to select Roll 83, Labor Contracts, and it's Labor Contracts Johnson through Tatnall. And I'm going to be taken to the microfilmed images. And you would then be able to scroll the information. First, you will see the descriptive pamphlets, and then it'll get into the records. As I look at all of the pages, I would eventually get to the record, and I can eventually get to image 194, and I can find Calvin Blackshire, the same contract we saw indexed. Okay, so that's family search. So now let's talk about SOVA, the Smithsonian Online Virtual Archives. Now, it also has a summary, it has an overview, gives you the history, and this is, and one thing here, this site is partially indexed, but not only indexed, it is, there's a transcription project that's going on at Smithsonian that some of the records have been already fully transcribed. So here will be the overview. You would continue to look, and you would see that this is how it indicates whether some of the records or all of the records have been transcribed. You'll see a note that says partially transcribed on some of the sites. But we're going to continue to look and see how to use this browsing. So you continue to scroll and you'll get to the records. You see that it's organized as we've talked about. The assistant commissioners, you see the field office. So you make your selection. I'm going to select field offices. And under field offices, I'm going to select Georgia. So once I select Georgia, then I need to go to contents. Now, one note here before we go to the next page, here you see search within the collection. If you know that there is partial indexing or partial transcription that has been done, you can go ahead and enter keywords here and see what records out of this collection you're able to generate. But let's just go ahead and continue browsing. So we've chosen Georgia, the field offices, and now we're going to select contents, excuse me. Under contents, you'll see different, let's say, file boxes that are available. I would like the subordinate field offices. Under subordinate field offices, now I'm going to look for Savannah. Under Savannah, I'm going to look for labor contracts. And under labor contracts, I'm going to pick the files that, or the images that contain the Johnson through Tatnall. Again, the same example that we went through our family search. You select the, you double click on the image, and you will be taken to the images on SOVA. And the way that it's organized, there are pages that you'll see indicated here. And each page has, I think on this one, it's 12 images. So I was able to find Calvin Blackshire image on the 9th page, and it was the 3rd image to get me to that exact same record that we have looked at on family search. And here you would use you can use the controls at the bottom right to adjust your view. So that's SOVA. Okay, so Ancestry. They're trying to change the game. They're trying to change the game. So in August 2021, they actually released a lot of these records, and they have been indexed. I'm going to say a lot. I'm not saying all. I think that there's still some that need to be excuse me, needs to be indexed, but they a lot of them, a lot of the records have been indexed. And the thing here, this collection is free. You do not need a subscription. You do need an ancestry account, a free ancestry account, but you do not need a subscription. So now you can enter the information. It's in if the information is indexed. Let me just say that you can enter the first name, last name, just like we've talked about. You can enter the location. You can enter, different spellings of the names. You can enter, instead of the city, you can enter the state, or you can leave that off. You also can browse the information by the levels. You see the Office of the Commissioner here. You see the field office records. So you can browse the records as we've discussed on the other site. You can also browse by the microfilm numbers. So if I'm in the field offices and I want to see the records from Georgia, I can pull M1903. Now, one other thing that I like to use in my search on Ancestry, and I use it sometimes, and sometimes I just want it wide open, but you can actually enter a keyword like labor or transportation, and you can do that to narrow your search. So let's go ahead and use that same example of Calvin Blackshire in Savannah. So I'm going to enter that information here and see what comes up. In this case, it yielded 2 records. I'm going to select the first record, and I'll be taken to this page where I see an image. And now I can double click on the image, and I'm actually at the actual image now. I can adjust it, and this is the labor contract that we've discussed before for Calvin Blackshire. And in this example, this is, you see that this is number 81 of 942, because this is the Ancestry organization and how they've organized the records. So now we're going to look at some actual sample records. And I want to just kind of preface that there were a lot. This is just a sample. I know that I did not get every type of record there is in the Bureau. I know that. And I purposefully didn't get anything that was too heinous, because some of it really is just gut-wrenching, and I didn't want to actually display that kind of information here. So I did the tamer stuff, and really just want to show those records and how you can pull genealogy information from records that you may find in the Bureau. So we've been talking about this contract for Calvin Blackshire. And one of the things here, and this kind of aligns to what Kayla was talking about, in this agreement, Jonathan and Lucinda had to firmly state, that they are firmly bound to Andrew Johnson, the President of the United States. So this is confirming their allegiance to the United States. It shows that Calvin will be paid $5 a month and that he works 6 days a week. It also says that Calvin will do all work at all times and must please the said Lucinda. So I don't know why it just says the said Lucinda, but that's what it says. Now here, maybe the relationship is that Calvin was an enslaved person, and maybe the enslavers were Lucinda and Jonathan. So this may require additional research, but that may be a clue. Now, this is another labor contract out of Louisiana, And this one is interesting because it shows family units. It gives their names and ages. So here you see Philip. He's 46 years old. He has his wife, Sally, and son. It shows their ages, their sex, their class, and their monthly payment. Now, the class is like your pay grade. So, if you're a 1, that's the highest grade. 2, there'll be a different pay grade, etc. Sorry, someone is trying to call me. Okay, now this is a wonderful transportation document. And I love this document because it is showing 112 freedmen who are being transported from Charlotte, North Carolina to Bolivar, Mississippi. And Nefertiti, one of my colleagues, shared this document with me. And it's a defunding of Carson's Landing. And that's a settlement in that particular county in Mississippi. And he's asking the Bureau to approve their transportation to work on his plantation. Now, one of the things that this application includes is a listing of all 110 people. And it has them in what looks like family units. So here, as an example, you have a York Price. He's 30. I'm assuming this is his wife, Sarah, 28. And then they have their children, Ben, Perry, Hannah, and Diana. And their ages are listed also. Now, one of the things you may notice here is that Hannah and Diana's names are crossed off. Now, the reason why, now they are part of the transportation request, but they are not contracted to work because of their ages. Hannah is noted as being 5 and Diana is 2. So a wonderful document. This is a document, pardon me. This is a document that I wanted to show, and it's a document from Florida. But these 2 people who are getting married were from or lived in Georgia. So this demonstrates why you should look in neighboring bureau offices, even if it's another state. So just wanted to demonstrate and show you that document. Now, this is a document, another marriage license. This is Thomas Blythe is marrying Sally Manson. Now, one of the things that Thomas indicated on this document is that he was brought from Kentucky and left a wife and 9 children. Can you imagine that? So, I mean, years later, maybe there's DNA matches in Kentucky and Tennessee, and no one knows what the connection is. Maybe this is the document that can connect them. Maybe Thomas is the clue. This is a rations list out of North Carolina, and this is a state level report, but it does provide the name of the people who are getting the rations. It gives their color. It says white or colored, quote unquote, and it provides a listing of how many pounds of pork and how many pounds of cornmeal that each person received. This is also a rations. This is more a rations report, and this is still a rations report, and it's from Louisiana. Now, one of the things, take a look at 47 and 48. It says there's a Armstead Brown and Marianne Brown. It lists 4 children, and it actually lists the names and ages, if you can see that, of the children. Now, it doesn't give the surnames of the children. You can assume it's Brown. Of course, this would need additional research. It shows where they live. It also says that the reason why they're getting these services is because of old age and sick leave. So again, another nice document to do more research. A lot of these documents only lead you or give you clues. They may not give you the full answer, but they will help you maybe get to your answer. Now, this is an apprentice agreement for a 7-year-old orphan, and this agreement is out of North Carolina, not Georgia, as I thought previously. It's an Andrew Lawing, and he is doing this agreement with the Bureau for this orphan child. And here it says that he is the orphan is 7 years old, or Monroe is 7 years old, and that he is to be an apprentice, to be a servant and an apprentice until he is 21 years of age. What is the relationship between Andrew Lawing and Monroe Lawing? Is it that maybe Andrew was the father, or was he the enslaver, or what? We don't know, but that's some additional information or research that you may want to look at. This is a register from a home colony in Louisiana, and it notes it records the arrivals and departures, and it shows their names, it shows their former residence, but it also shows their former enslaver. So this is a document that specifically marks that. This is a report of employed and hired people. And this is something that if your family member may have worked for the Bureau, or maybe you owned land or rented a building for a school or for an office, this will be a document that you may be able to find your ancestor named. So it just tells their name and how much they were paid on a monthly basis. This is probably one of my favorite in the examples that I'm showing. It's a daily record, school record, and it shows family units. So here you have Windsor, Stevens. It says he's the father. He's 50 years old, and it lists the children. Paige, 19, Alfred, it goes all the way down. You even see little Windsor. So maybe this is a document that actually denotes him, Windsor, as being the father. Maybe he made it to the 1870 census, but maybe he didn't make it to the 1880. So there's no specific record that shows that he's their father. This is a document that gives that information. Now, this one is a lot of times the Bureau would also get these letters, and they would get people would issue complaints and inquiries and different types of information you can find in the Bureau. This is actually a complaint that was submitted, and this is in Waynesboro, Georgia. Godby Thomas and his brothers. The brothers are not named, but they're filing a complaint against a G.J. Holding. He has put their sister out, is what it says. It says that has turned out their sister, Mary Bell. So here you have 2 different surnames, Mary Bell and Godby Thomas. They're saying they're sister and brother, or he's saying that's their sister. So again, additional information, additional clues. It says that she is sick and helpless, and if left in that condition, she will starve. So again, a great document to connect these two people who may not ever live together, but it connects them as brother and sister. And of course, you don't have the other brother's name, but you do have some clues. Now, this is a document, this is from 1875, so this is actually after the official dates of the Bureau. But this is at the Adjutant General's office record, and it's for a Charlie Pearson. And one of the things it shows his death date, shows his place of birth. Now, one of the things here, I believe that this was a claim. They were trying to get his pension. So it was they were doing the review and examination. And I believe his mother was providing a lot of the information. So you don't have a birth record, but you do have someone who was at the birth that's given the information. This document also showed the slave owner. It lists who he was owned by and the location. Now, this person did die. He was admitted into the hospital, so there may be hospital records also. He was treated for chronic diarrhea, and it does state that he died from that disease. And this is another register. It's a hospital register out of Tuskegee, and it gives the name of the patient, it gives their ages and where they live. But if you notice, it also identifies the patient as either a freedman or a refugee. So here you see the refugee would have been the formerly enslaved, and the refugee would have been a white person, and the freedman would have been a formerly enslaved person. And this is a inquiry. Again, they got a lot of information, a lot of requests. But this is an inquiry being made by Betsy Crown. It says that she's a freed woman and is the mother of a Henry Ennis. Again, two different surnames, making the connection of mother and son. And she says that her son now works for a Mr. Mansfield in Baton Rouge, and he will send her money through this office. So she's saying, my son is going to send me some money at this office, and she tells where she's living. So she's living on a plantation. Maybe she was enslaved at that plantation. But again, a lot of clues here. And again, it's a inquiry. Is this a document that again connects a mother and son? So you have a document that actually proves that connection, or has some documentation for that connection. So those are all the ones that I was able to pull. So we have gone through, and I've talked through this approach, knowing the history, understanding the hierarchy, understanding the record types, identifying the location, reading that descriptive pamphlet so you know how the Bureau operated in the place that you are researching. Understand what kind of records you may be trying to find, showing you how to search index records and browsing non-index records. In closing, know that you may miss important information if you only use the search index. So don't be afraid to browse the records. Look for articles and other resources to help you better understand your research location, the history, and the timeline of events. I did not go into a lot of the historical happenings at that time. So the time that the Bureau was operating, there was a lot of upheaval in the areas where they were serving. Some places the Bureau did not land. They were basically chased out of that area. So you may not have a lot of records in your research area, but just make sure that you're looking at all of the different records and seeing if you can find some nuggets in that information. And when you find information, share it with others. Let others know the information that you're finding in these records. Now, I have some books in my collection. These are three that you may be able to find in your library. These three books are in my personal library. This first book, Under the Guardianship of the Nation, is about the Bureau in Georgia. This book I use a lot. I do most of my research in Louisiana, so this is a book that I use. And the book in the middle is a book about the Bureau, how it operated overall. I would like to invite you to become a member of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society Metro Atlanta chapter. Join today, renew today. If you want information, you can go to our website at AAHGS.org, or you can send us an email at this site. Are there any questions? And I will stop presenting. Or maybe, I don't know, should I? That's all I have, guys. I hope that was okay. Are there any questions? Can somebody help me, either Penny or Kayla? Can you allow someone to speak, or can
Can you hear me? Are there any pictures of military records?
Sorry about that. There was a question about, are there any pictures of military records? And that would be in the Freedmen's Bureau collections, I think.
There are some. I haven't seen many. There are a lot of records. A lot of times for the USCT, you're going to find those a lot of complimentary records about the USCT in the Freedmen's Bureau records. Now, I have only seen maybe one, or I haven't seen a lot. So you can look. I don't know. I can't pinpoint any specifically. I have seen some, but I really don't know. I haven't really looked and seen any on my own, or gotten some from my own research.
Can you repeat the books again?
Yeah. The first book, Under the Guardianship of the Nation, and that's by Paul Cimbala, and that's Cimbala, Cimbala. The book I use a lot, which is, you can see kind of raggedy, is The Freedmen's Bureau in Louisiana, and that's by Howard Ashley White. And then this book is called A Short History of Reconstruction, and it is by Eric Foner, Foner.
There's another question. Tammy, there was a question about, have you run across any railroad records?
I have not in the Bureau records. I have not.
And I wouldn't think that the Freedmen's Bureau would have any jurisdiction over railroad records. So
right. The only thing I can think of is in transportations records. I have seen where they've outlined in the application, and once it was approved, how the freedmen was going to get from one location to the other. And they may say they're going to take train to one location, then they're going to take another train to a separate location, but not specific railroad information.
There was also a question, if you could describe your approach to research and family search.
Okay, I'm not really sure what that means, but the way that I like to do family search is I always go first to the index on records, and I showed you where to first, when you go to accessing the records, there are two types of collections, index and those you have to browse. I first always go to the index section and I look at what records are indexed and I do a search for, whatever I'm looking at for the index. Then I kind of knock that out all of the way, and then I go to those records and the one that I would have to browse. So again, using the descriptive pamphlets, if I'm doing Louisiana, then I know that I need to go to 1905. And if I'm whichever parish I'm looking at, then I'm going to go ahead and say, oh, this is where I need, these are the reels and the series that I need to, well, it was really the reels that I need to look at. And I'll just start browsing each image by image, because that's the only way. And I like to do it that way because now I'm kind of looking at what are the reports coming out of that field office? Who are the people? Because maybe I find someone that's not my person or my relative, but I know that they live next door to one of my ancestors. Or you'll see reports like in my parish is St. Landry, Louisiana. So you'll start seeing reports, well, there was no one who came to school because the blacks were being beat up. They were being unable to go to school because of the fear of being hurt, killed, that type of thing. So you'll actually see that type of information in the reports that's coming out. So it's like, oh, I'm looking for school records. Well, there are no school records on this week or this month because the writers were writing that week and they weren't allowing people to go to school. So that's my approach. I hope I answer. If not, you can ask me a more specific question and I'll try to answer it.
I have a question about the arrangement of the records that must be browsed. Do you find that they're in chronological order, or are they filed by name in any way that would help you pinpoint?
No, usually the ones that are browsed, you will see the organization by the hierarchy that I identified.
Right.
So what you have to do, that's where you have to look at the descriptive pamphlets. For example, sub-assisted level, you had that in Louisiana, but you may not have had that in Mississippi. So you have to kind of know what type of records they are, and that descriptive pamphlet, like for example, I'll give you another example. If I want to see rations information for my area, I have to go to the state level records in Louisiana. I cannot go and get that information for my particular area at the field office because that's not where those records were maintained. Okay. So that's why you have to understand you have to read the descriptive before you do anything. Understand the descriptive pamphlet. That's really your guide. Otherwise you're going to be lost, I think.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, let's see. Let me get back up here. Is there any information you've come across dealing with the Harlem Hellfighters from World War I related to any of the freedmen?
I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah. Is there any information you've come across dealing with the Harlem Hellfighters of World War I related to any of the freedmen?
No, I have not.
I think with the records that Tammy's dealing with the Freedmen's Bureau, they're only going to be within that time frame and only dealing with Freedmen's Bureau business.
That's
so
correct.
They're not going to include any references to World War I or military units after that time period.
Yeah, the official date of the Bureau ended 1872. You can find records probably through I think the one I showed was from 1875. I've seen some as late as maybe 1879, but you're not going to get anything much further than that.
Okay. Any others?
Yeah, just asking about specific books, but there was a slide on that, I don't know. Are there any specific books like the Commendation for Georgia?
Not accommodations. This is a book in regards to, this is called Under the Guardianship of the Nation, the Freedmen's Bureau and the Reconstruction of Georgia, 1865 to 1870. This is really the only book that I've seen specific to Georgia that talks specifically about how the Bureau operated in Georgia. So for me, this will be your best bet to try to get information about Reconstruction and the Bureau. And this is the best resource that I've found there.
There's been a question about photographs of Civil War units or military units, Civil War right after, and I think that you would have to look at the National Archives,
yeah,
and also within state archives for where those troops came from.
That's
to look
correct.
at records like that, photographs. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Naira has a whole thing on the of pictures from that timeline that you may be able to find. Yes.
Okay.
Say that's it.
Okay. Let me see. I guess I'll turn my.
Then I'm going to spotlight you.
Okay. Tammy, thank you so much. I really have not worked with the Freedmen's Bureau records. Really haven't had time since Ancestry has released that collection, but I really look forward to researching those, especially the ones that pertain to Georgia. So thank you again for a great presentation. The videos will be available on the program will be available on our YouTube channel. My slide presentation will be available on our website under the programs, on the programs page. I'll try to get that up as quickly as possible where you can reference the links and some of that information there. And then Tammy's information will be available through the video. We can maybe talk about making that available in the slide deck in other ways. Thank you all for joining us today, and thanks again to Tammy and to the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society for their co-sponsorship of this program. If you have any questions about any of the information that we haven't covered, if you would feel free to email to Ask an Archivist on the Georgia Archives website, we'll be glad to and try to answer your questions and refer any questions to Tammy. And in addition to Tammy inviting you to join the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, I'd like to invite you to visit the Georgia Archives for research. We are open from 9 to 12 and 1 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday, and we are here and eager to help you with your questions. Thank you, and have a great day.